The last time I saw my daughter's eyes without fear in them was the morning she told me she'd met someone. She was sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight catching the side of her face, and she looked like her mother, not just physically, though that was part of it. She had that same brightness Carol used to carry, that belief that the world was mostly good and people mostly meant well. I remember thinking, as I poured her coffee and watched her talk with her hands the way she always did when she was excited, that I would do anything to keep that light from going out. I didn't know then that I'd spend the next 3 years watching it dim. I didn't know that the man she was about to bring into our lives had already calculated exactly how much my daughter was worth and exactly how he planned to collect. And I certainly didn't know that the cluttered, climate-controlled storage unit I'd been renting since my wife died would become the only thing standing between Sophia and a man who wanted me in the ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Vincent Ashford. I'm 64 years old, and I've lived in Los Angeles my entire adult life. I raised my daughter here after my wife Carol passed away 12 years ago from pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to argue. Carol was 51 when she died, and she spent her last coherent weeks not grieving for herself but organizing. She organized our finances, our legal documents, our insurance policies. She sat with lawyers while hooked to an IV and made me promise things I didn't fully understand at the time. She wrote letters I wouldn't find until months after the funeral, tucked into drawers and between book pages like little time bombs of wisdom set to detonate when I needed them most. One of those letters said something I carried with me every day since. She wrote, "Vincent, protect Sophia with documents, not words. Words can be twisted, documents cannot. And protect her from people who would use love as a weapon." I thought it was the morphine talking. I thought she was being dramatic in the way dying people sometimes are, trying to compress a lifetime of wisdom into a few sentences. I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Not for years. After Carol died, I rented the storage unit. Unit Hai Chum Bon Mui Bay at Secure Vault Storage on Alameda. I told people it was for Carol's things, and that was partly true. Her winter coats hung in there, still smelling faintly of the lavender perfume she wore. Her books were stacked in careful columns. Photo albums from before Sophia was born sat in labeled boxes. But deeper inside, behind those genuine artifacts of grief, I'd built something else entirely. A locked metal cabinet containing every legal document that mattered. The family trust Carol and I had created, which owned the house and the investment accounts. The life insurance policy, $1.2 million, payable not to me or Sophia individually but directly into that trust. The deed to the house, updated wills, and a prenuptial agreement template that Carol had insisted I keep, saying only, "When Sophia gets serious with someone, you'll know if she needs this." For 12 years, I maintained that unit. I paid the monthly fee. I visited occasionally, sometimes just to sit among Carol's things and remember. The unit looked like an old man's inability to let go. That was by design. Nobody, not even Sophia, knew what was really in there. And for 12 years, that was fine. The documents sat in their cabinet like sleeping soldiers, unnecessary, gathering dust. Then Sophia brought Lucas Torrance home for Sunday dinner, and everything changed. I was standing at the stove when I heard her key in the front door. She still had a key. I'd never asked for it back after she moved out, and she used it like a hello, a little announcement that she was still my daughter, still belonged here in some fundamental way. I heard her laugh first, that full, open sound she made when she was genuinely happy. Then I heard a man's voice, low and warm, saying something I couldn't quite catch. And then they were in the kitchen. I want to tell you that I gave him a fair chance. I want to say I reserved judgment, that I let the evening unfold without prejudice. But I'd be lying. It took me about 15 seconds to understand that something about Lucas Torrance was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and it had nothing to do with his appearance. He was handsome, tall, dark-haired, well-dressed, in that effortless way that actually takes quite a bit of effort. He smiled at exactly the right moments. He complimented the dinner before tasting it. He asked about my work, about the house, about Los Angeles. All the right questions, all perfectly timed. And that was exactly the problem. People who are genuinely interested in getting to know you stumble a little. They ask odd questions. They circle back to things. They reveal something of themselves in the process. Lucas didn't do any of that. Every question was a probe. Every compliment was strategic. And every smile was deployed with the precision of someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror. When we sat down to eat, he looked around the dining room with an expression I recognized immediately. I'd seen it on the faces of real estate assessors and estate liquidators. He was appraising. "This is a beautiful home, Vincent," he said, cutting into his salmon. "How long have you owned it?" It wasn't a casual question. I could see the arithmetic happening behind his eyes. Los Angeles real estate, 40 years of ownership, original purchase price versus current market value. He was running numbers while pretending to make conversation. 40 years, I said. Carol and I bought it together. He nodded, filing the information like a clerk, organizing receipts. Must be worth quite a bit now. LA real estate, always going up. Sophia laughed nervously beside him. "Lucas, we just got here. Let's enjoy the meal." But he wasn't finished. Over the course of dinner, he extracted more information from me than most people learn about their neighbors in a decade. He asked about my career, whether I was retired, whether I still had active investments. He asked about travel. He mentioned his own life insurance policy at work and wondered aloud whether I had good coverage. "Everyone should have good coverage," he said, smiling at Sophia. "You never know what life throws at you." That line. That single, seemingly innocent line. I replayed it in my head for weeks afterward, because there was something in the way he said it, a slight emphasis on the word "throws," that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't a platitude. It was reconnaissance. After dinner, Sophia excused herself to the bathroom, and Lucas and I were alone in the kitchen doing dishes. The moment she left the room, something shifted. It was subtle, just a slight hardening of his expression, a dropping of the warmth he'd been performing all evening. Like an actor stepping off stage and letting the mask slip because he thought nobody was watching. But I was watching. "You've done well for yourself," he said, loading dishes into the sink. "Sophia's lucky to have this security. Not I'm lucky to have Sophia. Not we're building something wonderful together. Sophia's lucky to have this security." As if my daughter's primary value was what she stood to inherit. I didn't respond. I just kept rinsing plates and handing them over. Later, after they'd gone, I sat in my study with a glass of whiskey and Carol's photograph on the shelf above my desk. The honeymoon picture, both of us young and squinting into the sun on a beach in Catalina. She would have seen it too. That instant, visceral recognition of a predator wearing charm like cologne. She would have known exactly what Lucas Torrance was interested in, and it wasn't our daughter. I made a decision that night, not a dramatic one, not the kind of decision that feels momentous in the moment. I simply opened a leather journal Carol had given me years ago, one I'd never used, and I dated the first page. I wrote, "Sunday. First meeting with Lucas Torrance." Then I recorded everything, the questions he'd asked, in order. The way he'd appraised the house, the comment about security, the life insurance inquiry, the way his mask had slipped in the kitchen when Sophia wasn't looking. I told myself I was just being careful, just a protective father noting his impressions. But somewhere beneath that rational explanation, in a place I couldn't quite access, I think I already knew the truth. I think some part of me understood that this journal would become the most important document I'd ever create. That these observations, recorded in careful handwriting over what would become 3 years of entries, would eventually be the only thing standing between my daughter and something I couldn't yet name, but could already feel approaching, like the drop in pressure before a storm you can't see yet, but know is coming. I should have said something that night. I should have pulled Sophia aside and told her what I'd seen flickering behind Lucas's smile. But I knew my daughter. She was 31 years old, smart, independent, and deeply in love with the idea of being in love. If I warned her now, with nothing but a father's gut instinct and one evening's worth of observations, she'd think I was being overprotective. She'd defend him. She'd pull away from me. And Lucas, whatever Lucas really was, would use my premature warning as proof that her father was the enemy. So I did the hardest thing a parent can do. I said nothing. I smiled when she called to tell me about their next date. I listened when she described how thoughtful he was, how attentive, how he always knew exactly what she needed. I heard the manipulation in every story she told, and I kept my mouth shut. But I didn't stop watching, and I didn't stop writing. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known that night, as I sat in my study with Carol's photograph watching over me, was that Lucas had a timeline. He'd had one from the beginning. He hadn't stumbled into my daughter's life by accident. He'd found her the way a contractor finds a building site, by researching the neighborhood first. I would learn this later, Much later, when the private investigator I hired uncovered the digital trail Lucas had left behind, the searches he'd run on my name, the property records he'd pulled, the public filings he'd combed through, looking for exactly the kind of family he wanted to infiltrate. Aging patriarch, single daughter, substantial assets, and a dead wife who couldn't sound the alarm. He'd chosen us. He'd chosen Sophia not because he loved her, but because she was the key to a lock he'd already identified. And I'd sat across from him at my own dinner table, watching him smile and calculate, and I'd felt the truth of it in my bones even if I couldn't yet prove it. The wedding was 6 months later. I stood in the back of a garden venue in Pasadena and watched my daughter walk toward a man who saw her as an investment. The flowers were white hydrangeas, Carol's favorite. Sophia had chosen them on purpose, a way of including her mother in the day. I gave a toast that made people laugh. I danced with my daughter to a song Carol used to sing around the house. And when Lucas shook my hand afterward, I looked into his eyes and saw something that made my stomach turn. Satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of a man who just married the woman he loved. The satisfaction of a man who just closed a deal. I drove home alone that night and sat in my study until 3 in the morning, writing in the journal. I filled 4 pages. I described the way Lucas had watched me during the ceremony, not with warmth or family feeling, but with the patient attentiveness of someone waiting for an obstacle to remove itself. I described the way he'd steered Sophia away from me during the reception whenever our conversation went on too long. I described the toast he'd given, full of words like partnership and building together and securing our future, language that sounded romantic but meant something else entirely if you knew how to listen. And at the bottom of the 4th page, I wrote something that surprised even me. Carol, I think you knew. I think you knew someone like this would come. And I think everything you made me promise, every document you had me sign, every legal wall you insisted we build around Sophia's future, I think it was for this. I think you were protecting her from a man you never met, and I think you were right. I closed the journal and locked it in my desk. I wouldn't write in it again for 2 weeks, but when I did, the entry would be about the first time I noticed Sophia flinch when Lucas touched her arm. About the way her laughter had already started to sound different, thinner, more careful. About the way a light I'd been watching shine for 31 years had begun, almost imperceptibly, to dim. But that was still ahead. That night, all I knew was that my daughter had married a man who frightened me in ways I couldn't articulate, and that somewhere downtown, in a climate-controlled storage unit that smelled like dust and lavender, an old metal cabinet held the only things that might save her. I just didn't know yet how badly she was going to need saving, or how close I would come to losing everything before that cabinet could be opened. The first 6 months of their marriage, I told myself I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. Every parent wants to believe they're being overprotective, that the fear in their gut is just the ordinary terror of watching a child build a life with someone new. I wanted Lucas to prove me wrong so badly that I almost stopped writing in the journal. Almost. Sophia called me every few days during those early months. She sounded happy, or at least she sounded like she was trying to sound happy, and I couldn't always tell the difference. She'd talk about the condo they'd rented near Malibu, about how Lucas was redecorating, about dinners they'd cooked together, normal things, married things. And I'd listen and ask gentle questions and hang up and sit in my study and wonder if I'd been unfair to the man. Then the small things started. They were so small at first that I almost missed them. Sophia mentioned one afternoon that Lucas thought her yoga class was too expensive. "He's right, Dad. We're trying to save money." I didn't say anything, but I noted it. Sophia had been doing yoga for 8 years. It was the one thing she did entirely for herself. The 1 hour 3 times a week, where she wasn't someone's daughter or someone's wife, but just a woman breathing and stretching and existing in her own body. And now, it was too expensive. 2 weeks later, she mentioned that she and her college friend Megan had drifted apart. When I asked why, she paused just a beat too long before saying, "People change, Dad. Megan's in a different place in her life." I'd met Megan. Megan was loyal, perceptive, and blunt. Megan was exactly the kind of friend who might look at Lucas and say something Sophia wasn't ready to hear. Then it was her coworker Rachel. Then it was her neighbor from the old apartment. One by one, the people in Sophia's life started falling away, and each time there was a reasonable explanation. They'd grown apart. They had different priorities now. Lucas thought they were a bad influence. Lucas felt they didn't respect the marriage. Lucas believed real couples didn't need outside friendships to be happy. Each reason sounded plausible on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I recognized because I'd been reading about it. After that first Sunday dinner, I'd started researching, not on the internet, where searches leave trails, but at the public library downtown, where I could sit in the psychology section and read about coercive control, about narcissistic abuse, about the specific playbook that manipulators follow when they're dismantling a person's support system. The books described exactly what I was watching happen. Isolation first. Always isolation first. Remove the people who might see what you're doing, who might offer an alternative perspective, who might say, "This doesn't seem right." Make the victim believe that pulling away from everyone is her own choice, that it's natural, that it's what healthy couples do. And once she's alone, once you're the only voice she hears, then you can start reshaping what she believes. I wrote all of this down. I recorded every dropped friendship, every abandoned hobby, every small freedom that disappeared from Sophia's life. I dated each entry. I noted the context. I built a timeline that showed, with clinical precision, the systematic reduction of my daughter's world. 6 months into the marriage, Sophia called me with something different in her voice, not the bright, performing happiness I'd gotten used to. Something cautious and confused, like someone trying to describe a room they're standing in but can't quite see. "Dad, Lucas thinks I should know more about the family finances," she said carefully. "He says it's weird that I don't know anything about your money. He thinks you're keeping secrets from me." There it was, the pivot. He'd finished isolating her, and now he was turning her toward me, toward the assets, toward the real target. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't really think about it. But now I'm wondering, why haven't you told me about your finances, Dad? It does seem kind of strange." She wasn't wrong, and that's what made Lucas's move so effective. It was strange that I hadn't told her. Most parents share at least a general outline with their adult children. But Carol and I had agreed years ago that Sophia wouldn't know about the trust or the insurance or the prenuptial agreement until she needed to. Carol's reasoning had been simple and, as it turned out, prophetic. If she doesn't know what she has, no one can manipulate her into giving it away. "Sophia," I said, "there's nothing sinister about my finances. When the time is right, we'll sit down and go through everything together. But right now, I need you to trust me." Lucas says that's exactly what someone keeping secrets would say. And there it was, the seed, planted so carefully that Sophia didn't even realize it was there. Lucas had taken the natural trust between a father and daughter and introduced just enough doubt to crack it. Not shatter it, not yet. Just crack it. Just enough to let suspicion seep in like water through a fissure in concrete. Given enough time, that water would freeze and expand, and the whole foundation would split apart. I hung up and wrote 3 pages in the journal that night. I described the conversation word for word. I analyzed the technique. I noted that Lucas hadn't accused me of anything directly. He'd simply made Sophia question me, which was far more effective than any accusation could have been. An accusation can be denied. A question lingers. A week later, Sophia called again. This time she was upset, her voice tight with a confusion that bordered on anger. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. What's going on?" "Lucas says that Jacob has always had feelings for me." I went very still. "He says Jacob told him that he thinks our marriage is a mistake. He says Jacob wants to break us up because he's still in love with me." Jacob Winters, my closest friend for 33 years, the man who'd held my hand at Carol's funeral, the man who'd taught Sophia to ride a bike when I was working late, the man who'd never, in 3 decades of friendship, been anything other than a steadfast, honorable presence in our lives. Lucas was lying about him so casually, so completely, that I felt physically sick. "Sophia, that's not true. Jacob would never." "How do you know that, Dad? How do you really know what Jacob says when you're not around?" The question landed like something thrown from a great height. She was actually doubting Jacob, a man she'd known her entire life, a man who'd been more like an uncle than a family friend. Lucas had taken 33 years of trust and loyalty and rewritten it with a single lie, and Sophia, already softened by months of isolation and subtle manipulation, was beginning to believe it. "Lucas has no reason to lie to me," she said, defensiveness creeping in. "He barely even knows Jacob. Why would he make that up?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "Because that's what he does, Sophia. Because he's cutting you off from everyone who loves you, so that when the time comes, there will be no one left to save you. But I didn't, because I understood, with the terrible clarity of someone watching a slow-motion disaster, that saying those words would only push her deeper into Lucas's arms. He'd predicted this. He'd probably told her, "Your father will try to defend Jacob. That's how you'll know I'm telling the truth." So I said, "Just think about it, sweetheart. Think about who Jacob has been to this family. Think about what you know to be true." She hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next few weeks, I watched Sophia pull away from Jacob. She stopped returning his calls promptly. She made excuses when he suggested getting together. The warmth she'd always shown him was replaced by something guarded and suspicious, and Jacob noticed. He called me one evening, bewildered and hurt. "Vincent, what happened? Sophia barely talks to me anymore. Last time I saw her, she looked at me like I'd done something wrong. Did I do something?" "No," I said. "You didn't do anything." "Then what's going on?" I couldn't tell him, not yet. I didn't have enough evidence, and I was afraid that if Jacob knew the truth, he'd confront Lucas directly, which would be the worst possible thing. Lucas was hoping for a confrontation. A confrontation would prove his narrative. It would make Jacob look aggressive and unstable, and would cement the lie in Sophia's mind. "Just keep being yourself, Jacob," I said. "Keep reaching out to her. Don't stop." "I won't," he said, and he didn't. For 3 years, despite Sophia's increasing coldness, despite her canceled plans and unreturned messages, Jacob kept calling. He kept showing up. He kept being present in the quiet, stubborn way that only real love can sustain. He didn't know why Sophia was pulling away, and the not knowing must have been agonizing, but he stayed. That mattered more than he could have understood. Meanwhile, I was starting to see the financial control take shape. It happened gradually, the way Lucas did everything. First, he suggested they combine their bank accounts. "It's what married couples do, babe. We're a team." Then he took over paying the bills because he was better with numbers. Then Sophia's paycheck started going into a joint account that Lucas managed. Then the joint account became, functionally, Lucas's account, with Sophia asking permission for purchases the way a child asks for allowance. I knew this because Sophia would mention things in passing, not as complaints, never as complaints. She'd say, "Lucas handles the money stuff," with a smile, as if this were evidence of how well their partnership worked. She'd say, "I don't really need to worry about finances because Lucas has it covered." She didn't see the cage being built around her. She thought it was a house. By the end of the first year, I had a journal with over 200 pages of dated observations, 200 pages documenting the isolation, the financial control, the psychological manipulation, 200 pages that showed, in meticulous detail, how Lucas Torrance was systematically dismantling my daughter's independence and replacing it with dependence on him. I sat in the storage unit one evening, reading through those pages, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, though that was there too. I felt grief. I was grieving for the daughter I'd raised, the bright, confident woman who made decisions without fear and laughed without checking to see if it was okay first. That woman was disappearing, being erased one small concession at a time, and I was watching it happen from behind a wall of silence, because I knew that speaking up would only accelerate the process. Carol's letter echoed in my mind. Protect her from people who would use love as a weapon. That's exactly what Lucas was doing. He was wielding love like a blade, cutting away everything that connected Sophia to her own identity and replacing it with himself. And the cruelest part was that Sophia couldn't feel the cuts. Each one was so small, so reasonable, so wrapped in the language of partnership and devotion, that she thought she was being loved when she was being dismantled. The second year brought something I'd been dreading. It started with a bruise on Sophia's forearm, visible when she reached across the table for the salt during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. It was dark, finger-shaped, the kind of mark that doesn't come from bumping into furniture no matter what story you tell. "What happened to your arm?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She pulled her sleeve down immediately, an automatic gesture that told me everything. "Oh, I'm so clumsy. I tripped getting out of the shower." She delivered the lie smoothly, without hesitation, the way someone does when they've rehearsed it, or when someone else has rehearsed it with them. I didn't push. I wrote it down that night. Date, location on the body, the explanation she gave, and my assessment that the explanation was inconsistent with the injury. I wrote it the way a doctor would chart a patient's symptoms, clinical and precise. because I understood that someday these notes might need to function as evidence, and evidence works best when it's dispassionate. More bruises followed. Her hip, her thigh, the inside of her upper arm, where a handprint could be hidden by a sleeve. Each time there was a story. Each time the story was delivered with that same practiced ease. Each time I noted it in the journal and said nothing, and each time a piece of me died. There is a particular kind of helplessness that comes from watching your child be hurt and knowing that intervening will only make things worse. It's not like any other helplessness I've experienced. It's active and corrosive. It eats at you from the inside. There were nights I sat in my study with my fists clenched so hard my nails drew blood from my palms. Nights when every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive to that Malibu condo and drag my daughter out by force. But I knew, with the grim certainty of someone who'd done the research, that premature action would be catastrophic. If I confronted Lucas, he would deny everything. He would turn Sophia against me completely. He would use my intervention as proof that I was the controlling one, the dangerous one. And Sophia, deep in the fog of abuse, would believe him. She would choose him over me, because that's what victims do when they're not ready to see the truth. They protect the person hurting them and blame the person trying to save them. It's not weakness, it's survival. It's the mind's way of coping with a reality too painful to accept. So I did the only thing I could do. I documented. I waited. I maintained my presence in Sophia's life, in whatever diminished capacity Lucas would allow. I kept the door open, kept the phone line clear, kept the Sunday dinner invitation standing, even when she canceled more often than she came. I made sure she always knew she had somewhere to go, someone who would take her in, no questions asked. And I kept filling that journal, page after page, month after month. A father's record of his daughter's destruction, written in careful handwriting by a man who was playing the longest, most agonizing game of his life. By the middle of year 2, I'd started keeping something else in the storage unit. Photographs. Not of happy memories, but of Sophia's injuries. She didn't know I was taking them. During our dinners, when she'd reach for something and her sleeve would ride up, when she'd shift in her chair and wince at a pain she thought I didn't notice, I'd excuse myself to the bathroom and write down what I'd seen. Later, I'd sketch the injury from memory, noting the size, shape, color, and location. I knew sketches wouldn't hold up the way photographs would, but I couldn't exactly ask my daughter to pose for pictures of her bruises. Then something unexpected happened. Sophia came to dinner one Sunday, with a bruise on her cheekbone that no amount of concealer could hide. She said she'd walked into a cabinet door. She said it with that rehearsed certainty. But when she went to the bathroom, I did something I'd never done before. I followed the sound of running water to the hallway and waited. When she came out, I was standing there, and for one unguarded moment, before she could reconstruct the mask, I saw her face. The real face, beneath the performance. Exhausted, frightened, lost. I raised my phone and took a photograph. She didn't notice. She was looking down, adjusting her sleeve, preparing to walk back into the dining room and continue pretending that everything was fine. I had the photo printed the next day and stored it in the metal cabinet at the storage unit. It was the first piece of physical evidence I had, and looking at it made me feel something that went beyond anger or grief. It made me feel certain that this was going to end, certain that I would end it. I just didn't know how yet. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have anticipated in my most paranoid moments, was that Lucas was running his own timeline, that while I was patiently building a case, he was patiently building a plan. And his plan didn't involve waiting. His plan involved accelerating toward an endpoint I hadn't yet imagined, one that would put not just Sophia's future at risk, but my life. The collision between his plan and mine was coming. And when it arrived, it would be violent and sudden, and would force me to stop being a documentarian and start being something else entirely. But that reckoning was still months away. For now, I sat in my storage unit with a photograph of my daughter's bruised face, and I added another entry to the journal. I dated it carefully. I described what I'd seen, and at the bottom of the page, I wrote a single sentence that I'd never written before, one that marked a shift in everything that would follow. I think it's time to stop watching and start preparing for war. The third year was when Lucas stopped being careful, not all at once, not in a single dramatic unraveling, but in the way a man stops checking his rearview mirror when he's convinced no one is following him. He'd spent 2 years building his cage around Sophia so methodically, so patiently, that he'd started to believe it was unbreakable. And that confidence, that arrogance, was the first crack in his armor. I noticed it during a Sunday dinner in January. Sophia had come alone, which was unusual. Lucas typically drove her to my house and picked her up afterward, controlling even the logistics of her visits. But this time she'd driven herself, and she seemed lighter for it, not happy exactly, but less compressed, less like a woman holding her breath. We were eating when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and something passed over her face, fast and involuntary, like a flinch. She silenced the call and put the phone face down on the table. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just Lucas checking in." The phone rang again 30 seconds later. She silenced it again. Then it rang a third time, and this time she picked it up and walked into the hallway. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone. His voice, tinny through the speaker, was sharp and relentless. Her voice was soft, conciliatory, the voice of someone trying to calm a dog that's baring its teeth. When she came back, the lightness was gone. She was compressed again, smaller, the brief freedom of driving herself already erased by a 3-minute phone call. "Lucas wants me home by 8, she said, not meeting my eyes. It was 6:30. She'd been at my house for less than an hour. I didn't argue. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was that a grown woman shouldn't need permission to eat dinner with her father. I just nodded and watched her eat faster, watched her check the time on her phone every few minutes, watched her leave at 7:45 with an apology in her eyes and fear underneath it. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time. Her plate was still half full. She'd been eating less, I'd noticed. Not dieting, nothing that deliberate. Just the gradual appetite loss that comes from living in a state of constant low-grade terror. The body shuts down the functions it considers non-essential when it's focused on survival. Hunger is one of the first to go. I drove to the storage unit that night and spent 2 hours writing. I filled 6 pages, not just observations this time, but analysis. I was starting to see something I hadn't seen before, a 5th pattern layered beneath the 4 I'd already identified. Isolation, financial control, psychological manipulation, physical violence. Those were the patterns I'd documented. But the 5th pattern was subtler, and in some ways more disturbing. Lucas was rehearsing. Everything he did, every tactic he deployed, had the precision of something practiced. The way he isolated Sophia followed a specific sequence that I'd read about in clinical literature. The way he escalated from control to violence followed a textbook trajectory. Even the lies he told, the ones about Jacob, the ones about me keeping secrets, they weren't improvised. They were strategic, targeted at the exact relationships that posed the greatest threat to his control. This wasn't a man figuring things out as he went. This was a man running a playbook. And that meant, with a certainty that settled into my bones like ice water, that he'd done this before. I started a new section in the journal that night. I titled it simply, "Before Sophia," and began writing down every question I needed answered. Where had Lucas lived before Los Angeles? Who had he been with? Were there other women who'd experienced what my daughter was experiencing? Had he left a trail of broken, isolated, financially drained women behind him? And if so, could I find them? I didn't have the skills to investigate this myself. I was a 64-year-old man with a leather journal and a storage unit full of documents. I needed professional help, so I made a call I'd been considering for months. Ray Castillo was a private investigator I'd worked with years ago on a business matter. He was thorough, discreet, and most importantly, he understood nuance. I didn't need someone who'd kick down doors. I needed someone who'd follow paper trails and digital footprints and piece together a history that Lucas had tried very hard to erase. We met at a diner in Culver City. Ray was in his 50s, compact, with the kind of face that people forgot immediately after looking at it, which was probably an asset in his line of work. I told him everything. The journal, the patterns, the bruises, the lies. I told him about the storage unit and the documents inside. I told him about my growing conviction that Lucas had done this before. Ray listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took a long sip of his coffee and said, "How far do you want me to go?" "As far as it takes," I said. "I need to know who this man really is." Ray started working the next day. Within a week, he'd uncovered something that confirmed my worst suspicions and added a dimension I hadn't anticipated. Lucas Torrance was not his real name, or rather, it was his legal name now, but it hadn't always been. He'd been born Lucas Barron in Tucson, Arizona. He'd changed his name at 26, Shortly after, a woman named Danielle Voss had filed a restraining order against him. Ray pulled the court records. The details were chillingly familiar. Danielle described a man who'd charmed her, isolated her from her family and friends, taken control of her finances, and then escalated to physical violence when she tried to leave. The restraining order had been granted, and Lucas Barron had disappeared from Tucson entirely. But Danielle wasn't the only one. Ray traced Lucas's path backward and found 2 more women, one in Phoenix, one in San Diego. Both relationships had followed the same arc: charm, isolation, control, violence, and then, when the women finally broke free, or when Lucas sensed that the walls were closing in, he'd vanish. New city, new name, new target. The San Diego woman, a woman named Karen Lee, had tried to press charges. The case had been dropped for insufficient evidence. Karen had left San Diego shortly after, and Ray found a forwarding address in Oregon, but nothing beyond that. She disappeared into the anonymity of a woman trying to forget the worst years of her life. I sat in Ray's car outside the diner and read through the file he'd assembled. 3 women before Sophia. 3 women who'd been charmed, isolated, controlled, beaten, and abandoned. 3 women who'd had their lives dismantled by a man who treated human connection as a confidence game. And now he had my daughter. "There's something else," Ray said, watching me read. "Something that doesn't fit the pattern." "What?" "The other women, Danielle, Karen, the woman in Phoenix, he left them. When things got difficult, when they started fighting back, or when he sensed the law getting close, he cut his losses and moved on. But with Sophia, he's not leaving." I looked up from the file. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's escalating instead of exiting. He's getting more aggressive, more controlling, more desperate. That's not consistent with his previous behavior. With the other women, he was running a con. Get in, take what he could, get out. But with Sophia, he's staying, he's digging in. Which means something about this situation is different." I knew what was different: the money. The other women had been comfortable but not wealthy. Danielle was a dental hygienist. Karen worked in retail. The Phoenix woman was a school teacher. Lucas had extracted what he could from each of them, thousands of dollars in the case of Karen, but nothing that would set him up for life. Sophia was different. Sophia had a father with a house worth close to $1 million, a life insurance policy worth $1.2 million, and a trust she didn't even know about. Lucas had found the score he'd been working toward his entire career, the one target worth staying for, worth escalating for, worth risking everything for. "He's not going to leave," I said quietly. "He's never going to leave, voluntarily." "No," Ray agreed, "which means this ends one of 2 ways. Either you get her out, or he gets what he came for." I took the file home and added it to the metal cabinet in the storage unit. 3 women's stories now sat alongside my journal, alongside the photographs of Sophia's bruises, alongside the legal documents that protected her inheritance. The cabinet was becoming something more than a repository. It was becoming a case file, the kind of thing that prosecutors build before they go to trial. But I still couldn't move. Not yet, because Sophia still didn't see it. She was still deep inside the fog Lucas had built around her, still believing that his control was love, that his violence was passion, that his lies were protection. And I knew that pulling her out too soon, before she had even a sliver of her own doubt to hold on to, would only drive her back to him harder. So I waited, and I watched, and I wrote. The waiting nearly killed me, not figuratively. There were nights during that 3rd year when I felt something in my chest that I was fairly certain was my heart trying to give out. The stress of knowing, of watching, of being unable to act. It was a physical weight. I lost 15 pounds. I stopped sleeping through the night. Jacob noticed. "You look terrible," he said one afternoon when we met for coffee. Jacob and I had maintained our regular meetings, though we both understood that the subtext of every conversation was Sophia. "I'm fine," I said, which was the most transparent lie I'd ever told. Jacob leaned across the table. "Vincent, talk to me." I almost did. I almost told him everything right there. The journal, the storage unit, Ray's investigation, the 3 women before Sophia. But something held me back. Not distrust. I trusted Jacob with my life. It was something more practical. If Jacob knew the full scope of what Lucas was, I wasn't sure he could maintain the composure necessary to keep our hand hidden. Jacob was a good man, a moral man, the kind of man who sees injustice and wants to charge at it head-on, and charging head-on at Lucas Torrance would be catastrophic. "When the time is right, I'll tell you everything," I said. "I promise. But right now, I need you to trust me and keep doing what you're doing. Keep reaching out to Sophia. Keep being present. Don't let her forget that you exist." Jacob studied my face for a long time. Whatever he saw there must have been convincing, because he nodded slowly and didn't push further. The shift came in April. It was a Wednesday, and I was at the grocery store when my phone rang. It was Sophia, and her voice sounded wrong. Not the rehearsed calm she'd been performing for 2 years. Something rawer, something cracked. "Dad, can I come over?" "Of course. When?" "Now. Right now." She arrived 20 minutes later. When she walked through the door, I saw that she'd been crying. Her eyes were swollen and red, and she was hugging herself in the way people do when they're trying to physically hold themselves together. We sat in the kitchen. I made tea. I didn't ask questions. I just waited. "Lucas was on the phone last night," she said finally. "He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I was lying in bed and I could hear him in the other room." She paused, staring into her tea. "He was talking to someone about you, Dad. About your insurance. About the house. About how much everything would be worth if—" She stopped. Her hands were shaking. He said, "The old man can't live forever. One way or another, this gets resolved soon." I went very still, not because I was surprised. I'd suspected for over a year that Lucas's endgame involved my death. But hearing it from Sophia, hearing that she'd heard it herself, watching her face as the words she'd overheard rearranged everything she thought she knew about her husband, that was something else entirely. "Sophia," I said carefully, "what do you think he meant?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I don't know what to think anymore. I keep trying to find an explanation that makes it okay. Like, maybe he was just venting. Maybe he was talking about money, and it came out wrong. But Dad, the way he said it." She looked at me, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or confusion, or the glazed compliance of a woman under someone else's control. I saw doubt. Real doubt. The first hairline fracture in the wall Lucas had built around her mind. "It didn't sound like venting," she whispered. "It sounded like planning." I reached across the table and took her hands. They were ice cold. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Not what Lucas would want you to say, not what you think I want to hear, just the truth." She nodded, tears beginning to fall. "Are you afraid of him?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, vibrating with everything she'd been carrying alone for 3 years. And then she answered, in a voice so small, it barely existed. "Yes." That single word changed everything, not because it told me something I didn't know, but because it told me that Sophia was beginning to know it herself. The fog was starting to lift. The fracture was widening. For the first time since that Sunday dinner 3 years ago, my daughter was seeing a glimmer of the truth through the elaborate fiction Lucas had built around her. I didn't push. I didn't show her the journal, or tell her about Ray's investigation, or reveal the storage unit. She wasn't ready for all of that. Not yet. A woman emerging from the kind of psychological prison Lucas had constructed doesn't need to be hit with the full scope of reality all at once. That would be as cruel, in its own way, as what Lucas had been doing. She needed to arrive at the truth gradually, at her own pace, guided but not dragged. "You can stay here tonight," I said. "You can stay here whenever you need to." "I can't," she said, and the fear came flooding back. "If I don't go home, he'll know something's wrong. He'll know I hurt him." "Sophia." "Dad, please, I'm not ready. I just needed to tell someone. I just needed someone else to know." She left an hour later. I watched her drive away and felt the competing forces inside me, the father who wanted to lock the door and never let her leave again, and the strategist who understood that Sophia had to come to this on her own terms or not at all. That night, I called Jacob. Not to tell him everything, not yet, but to say 4 words that I'd been holding back for 3 years. "I'm going to need your help." And Jacob, without asking a single question, without needing context or explanation, said, "I'm already there." The next morning, I sat in the storage unit and opened the metal cabinet. I looked at 3 years of documentation, 800 pages of journal entries, photographs, court records from Tucson, Phoenix, and San Diego, financial documents, legal protections, a letter from a dead woman who'd known this day would come. I closed the cabinet and locked it. Then I pulled out my phone and called Ray Castillo. "I need you to put full surveillance on Lucas Torrance," I said. 24 hours a day. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to, everything he buys. And Ray, if he makes any calls about insurance, about money, about me, I want to know immediately." "You think he's moving soon?" Ray asked. My daughter overheard him talking about resolving things. His word, resolving. There was a pause on the line. Then Ray said, "I'll have someone on him by tonight." I hung up and sat in the silence of the storage unit, surrounded by boxes of Carol's things and the metal cabinet that held everything that mattered. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt something sharper, more focused, more dangerous. I felt ready. But ready for what, exactly, I still didn't fully understand, because Lucas Torrance, or whatever his real name was, hadn't survived this long by being predictable. He'd evaded 3 previous women, a restraining order, and a criminal investigation. He'd changed his name and reinvented himself and started over without leaving a trace. He was a professional at this, a career predator who'd perfected his technique over a decade of practice. And I was about to find out just how far a professional predator would go when he sensed the trap closing around him. The call from Jacob came on a Thursday afternoon in late September. I remember because I was standing in my kitchen making a sandwich I wouldn't eat, going through the motions of a normal day, while my mind ran calculations I couldn't stop. How much time did we have? What Lucas might be planning? Whether Sophia was safe at that exact moment? The endless arithmetic of vigilance. My phone rang, and Jacob's name appeared on the screen. I knew before I answered that something had shifted. Jacob and I had a rhythm by then, a schedule of check-ins that we'd developed over the preceding weeks. Thursday afternoon was not part of that schedule. An unscheduled call from Jacob meant something had happened. "Vincent, we need to talk." His voice was different, tight, controlled in the way a man's voice gets when he's holding something back that wants to come out as a scream. "I need to see you today. Not tomorrow, not tonight. Today, now." "What happened?" "Not over the phone. I'm coming to you. And Vincent, I think it's worse than we thought." He arrived 20 minutes later. I'd never seen Jacob look the way he did walking through my front door. He was pale, his jaw was set, and his hands wouldn't stay still. He kept opening and closing his fists, like he was trying to grip something that wasn't there. We sat in my study. I closed the door. Jacob didn't sit down immediately. He paced the length of the room twice before stopping at the window, his back to me, looking out at the yard where Sophia used to play when she was small. "I ran into Sophia at the grocery store," he said. "I almost didn't recognize her, Vincent. She's lost more weight. She looks like she's disappearing." I nodded. I'd noticed the same thing during our last dinner. I asked her how she was doing. She gave me the usual answer. "Fine. Everything's great. Lucas is wonderful." But then I looked down, and I saw her arms. Jacob turned from the window. His eyes were bright with something that was either fury or grief, or both. "Dark bruises, Vincent. Not the kind you get from bumping into things. The kind you get from being grabbed, from being held down." She saw me looking at them and she tried to cover them up, pulled her sleeves down, crossed her arms. But it was too late. I'd seen them. "What did she say?" I asked, though I already knew the shape of the answer. The usual lies at first. "She fell. She's clumsy. You know how it is." But I pressed her, gently. I said, "Sophia, I've known you since you were born. You can tell me the truth." And something broke open in her. Jacob sat down heavily in the chair across from me. He looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in an afternoon. "She told me Lucas got angry because she laughed too loud at something on her phone. Laughed too loud, Vincent, and he grabbed her hard enough to leave marks that were still visible days later. But that wasn't what scared her the most." "What scared her the most?" "He told her that if she said anything to you, he'd make sure you paid for it. His exact words were, 'If you tell your father about this, I'll make sure he regrets ever trying to take you away from me, one way or another.'" The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of 2 old friends sitting together, but the compressed quiet of a space where something dangerous has just been revealed. I could hear the clock on my desk ticking. I could hear a bird outside the window. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and deliberate, the heartbeat of a man who'd been preparing for this moment for 3 years. "He threatened you, Vincent," Jacob said. "He's not just hurting her anymore. He's threatening to come after you." "I know," I said. And I did know. I'd known it was coming. The overheard phone call Sophia had told me about weeks earlier, the one where Lucas talked about resolving things, that had been the warning. This was the confirmation. Lucas had moved past the endgame of control, and into the endgame of elimination. He'd calculated that I was the primary obstacle between him and everything he wanted, and he'd decided that the obstacle needed to be removed. "I'm going to tell you everything now," I said to Jacob. "Everything I've been carrying. And I need you to listen without interrupting, because some of it is going to make you angry, and some of it is going to hurt, and I need you to hear all of it before you react." Jacob nodded. He gripped the arms of the chair, and he listened. I told him about the journal. 3 years of documentation, 800 pages. I told him about the storage unit and what it contained. I told him about the prenuptial agreement, and the trust, and the insurance policy, and the way Carol had built an entire legal fortress around Sophia's future before she died. I told him about Ray Castillo and the investigation. I told him about the 3 women before Sophia, Danielle Voss in Tucson, Karen Lay in San Diego, the unnamed woman in Phoenix. I told him that Lucas Torrance wasn't even his real name, that he was Lucas Barron, a man who'd spent a decade moving from city to city, targeting women, isolating them, controlling them, bleeding them dry, and disappearing before anyone could hold him accountable. And then I told him the part that I'd been most afraid to say out loud. I believe Lucas is planning to kill me. I believe he's been planning it for some time. I believe he intends to stage it as an accident, or make it look like natural causes, and then use Sophia's grief to gain access to the insurance money and the assets. I believe this is what he's been working toward from the beginning, and I believe we're running out of time. Jacob was silent for a long time after I finished. His face had gone through several transformations during my account: shock, anger, grief, and finally something that looked like stone. The expression of a man who has absorbed a terrible truth and decided what to do about it. 3 years, he said quietly. You've been carrying this for 3 years. I needed proof. I needed a record that couldn't be dismissed as a paranoid father's imagination. I needed to build something so complete, so documented, so undeniable, that when the time came, no one could look away from it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid you'd confront him, and a confrontation would have been exactly what Lucas wanted. It would have proved every lie he'd told Sophia about you. It would have pushed her deeper into his control. I couldn't risk that. Jacob absorbed this. I could see him processing it, weighing his hurt against the logic of what I'd done. After a moment, he nodded. You were right, he said. I would have confronted him. I would have gone straight to that condo and put my hands on him, and it would have destroyed everything. I know. That's why I waited. So what now? Jacob leaned forward. What do we do? Now we prepare. Lucas is getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. We need to be ready when he makes his. Over the next hour, I laid out everything. The surveillance Ray had in place. The legal protection Stephen Garrett had helped me establish. The journal, the photographs, the court records from other states. Jacob listened to all of it with the focus of a man who'd been given a mission. What do you need from me? He asked when I finished. I need you to be my witness. I need you to be present, visible, documented. If something happens to me, I need there to be someone who can stand in a courtroom and testify to everything I've told you today. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who can point them directly to that storage unit and everything inside it. Nothing is going to happen to you, Jacob said fiercely. Maybe not. But if it does, Sophia needs someone who knows everything. She needs someone who can show her the truth, if I'm not around to show her myself. That person is you, Jacob. Jacob stood up and walked to the window again. He stood there for a long time, looking out at the fading afternoon light. I'll do whatever you need, he said finally. But Vincent, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me we're not just going to wait for him to make a move. Promise me we're going to stop him before he can. That's exactly what we're going to do, I said. But we have to be smart about it. We have to let him think he's still in control. We have to let him believe his plan is working. Because a man who thinks he's winning is a man who gets careless, and careless is what we need him to be. The days that followed were the most focused of my life. Jacob and I established a system, daily check-ins, alternating between phone calls and in-person meetings. We coordinated with Ray, who had a surveillance team tracking Lucas's movements around the clock. I varied my own routines, taking different routes to the grocery store, changing the times I left the house, never establishing a pattern that Lucas could study and exploit. I also did something I probably should have done years earlier. I installed security cameras at my house, not the obvious kind that sit on door frames and blink red. Small, discrete cameras, positioned at angles that covered every approach to the property, motion sensors on the gates, a silent alarm connected to my phone. I turned my home into a fortress without making it look like one. And then, 10 days after Jacob's visit, Ray called with something that changed the calculus entirely. "I've been monitoring his phone activity," Ray said. "He's been making calls to a number I traced to a man named Derek Solis. Solis has a record. Assault, breaking and entering, 1 count of arson that was plea bargained down to criminal mischief. He's the kind of guy you call when you need something done and you don't want to do it yourself." "What are they discussing?" "I can't tap the calls. That's illegal and I won't do it. But I can tell you the pattern. Lucas calls Solis late at night, always between 11 and midnight. The calls last between 5 and 15 minutes. They've had 9 calls in the last 2 weeks, and yesterday they met in person at a bar in Venice Beach. My guy was there. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he got photographs." "Send me everything." Ray's file arrived an hour later. Photographs of Lucas and Derek Solis sitting at a corner table, leaning close, speaking with the hushed intensity of men planning something they don't want overheard. Solis was heavyset, tattooed, with the flat, incurious eyes of someone who'd learned to suppress empathy as a professional necessity. He looked like exactly what he was, a man for hire. I sat with those photographs for a long time. Then I called Stephen Garrett. "Stephen, I need to update the threat assessment. Lucas has been in contact with a man named Derek Solis. He has a criminal record. I believe Lucas is hiring him to do something." Stephen was quiet for a moment. "Vincent, we need to involve law enforcement. This has gone beyond civil protection." "I know, but I need to time it right. If we go to the police too soon, with surveillance photos and circumstantial evidence, they'll bring Lucas in for questioning and then release him. And a man who's been questioned and released is a man who knows he's being watched. He'll go to ground. He'll change plans. He'll become harder to track and more dangerous because he'll know the clock is ticking." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we wait until we have something concrete, something that goes beyond phone calls and bar meetings, something that proves intent." "That's a dangerous game, Vincent." "I know, but I've been playing dangerous games for 3 years. I know how to be patient." Stephen didn't like it. I could hear his discomfort through the phone, but he also understood the logic. Premature action could scatter the evidence and send Lucas into hiding. We needed him confident. We needed him committed to his plan. We needed him to take one more step, the step that would prove beyond any doubt what he intended. That step came 3 weeks later, and it came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. I was in my study when my phone rang. It was Morris Reed, the manager at Secure Vault Storage. "Mr. Ashford," he said, and the concern in his voice was unmistakable. "We've had an incident. Someone tried to cut the lock on your unit." My blood went cold, not from surprise, but from the sudden crystallization of everything I'd feared. Lucas had found the storage unit. Somehow, through some combination of surveillance and determination, he'd located the place where I kept everything that mattered. Morris described the man, tall, dark-haired, mid-30s. He'd come in through an unsecured side door with bolt cutters. When Morris confronted him, he'd gotten aggressive, started shouting about his wife's inheritance, about his right to access the unit. Morris called security, and the man left, but not before threatening to come back. He said he knew what was in that unit, Morris told me, and he said I couldn't stop him from accessing his wife's inheritance. I thanked Morris and told him to increase security immediately. Then I hung up and sat in the silence of my house and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not fear, clarity. Lucas had made his first real mistake. He'd attempted a crime in broad daylight, on camera, at a facility with security personnel. He'd identified himself by description, if not by name. He'd stated his motive out loud, and he'd done all of this because he was desperate, because he could feel his plan unraveling, and he was reaching for the one thing he thought could save it. He didn't know what was in that unit. He couldn't know. But he knew it was important, and he was right about that. What he didn't know was that his attempt to access it was exactly the kind of concrete, documented, provable act that I'd been waiting for. I called Jacob. I called Stephen. I called Ray. And then, for the first time in 3 years, I called Detective Robert Lambert at the LAPD and said the words I'd been rehearsing in my head since the night Carol died. I need to report a crime, and I need to show you evidence of something much bigger. The gears were finally turning. The trap I'd spent 3 years building, the one made of patience and documentation and legal foresight and a dead woman's wisdom, was finally closing around the man who'd tried to destroy my daughter. But Lucas still had one move left, one desperate, violent, irreversible move that none of us saw coming, and it was going to happen faster than any of us were prepared for. The 48 hours after the storage unit break-in were the most dangerous of my life, and I didn't fully understand how dangerous until they were over. Detective Lambert was a careful man. When I walked into the precinct with Jacob and laid 3 years of documentation on his desk, he didn't react the way I expected. He didn't lean forward with urgency or reach for his phone to call backup. He put on reading glasses, opened the journal to the first page, and began to read, slowly, methodically, like a man who'd learned that rushing was how cases fell apart. Jacob and I sat across from him for 4 hours. Lambert read through the journal entries, examined Ray's surveillance photographs, reviewed the court records from Tucson and San Diego, studied the financial documents showing Lucas's pattern of draining his partner's resources. He asked questions, precise ones, the kind that told me he was building a mental architecture of the case, testing its load-bearing walls, looking for weaknesses a defense attorney might exploit. "The break-in attempt at the storage facility," Lambert said finally, looking up. "That's your strongest piece of recent evidence. It's provable. It's on camera, and it demonstrates intent to access protected assets. Combined with the restraining order violation and the documented history of escalation, I can work with this." "What about the calls to Derek Solis?" I asked. Lambert's expression shifted slightly. "That's more complicated. Phone records show contact, but contact alone isn't a crime. We need to establish what they were discussing, and right now, all we have is frequency and timing. So what do? We apply for warrants, his residence, his vehicle, his phone records, his financial accounts. We build the case from the outside in. But Mr. Ashford, I need you to understand something." Lambert took off his glasses and looked at me directly. "This process takes time, days, maybe weeks. And during that time, Lucas Torrance is still out there, and based on everything you've shown me, he's accelerating." "I know," I said. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "I'm not leaving my house," I said. "My daughter might need to come home, and if she does, I need to be there." Lambert studied me for a long moment, then he nodded. "I'll put a patrol car on your street, unmarked. They'll be there around the clock, until we can move on the warrants." Jacob and I drove home in silence. The adrenaline that had carried me through the meeting was fading, replaced by the hollow, buzzing exhaustion that comes after sustained intensity. I gripped the steering wheel and watched the road and tried to think clearly about what came next. "You should call Sophia," Jacob said quietly. "I know. Not to tell her everything. Not yet, but to get her out of that condo. If Lucas figures out you've gone to the police, the first thing he'll do is use her as leverage." Jacob was right, and I hated that he was right, because it meant the next move was the one I'd been dreading most. I had to ask my daughter to leave her husband without being able to fully explain why. I had to ask her to trust me, based on nothing more than my word and the doubt she'd been carrying since that overheard phone call. I called her that evening. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Dad?" She sounded cautious, the way she always sounded now, like someone standing on uncertain ground. "Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me carefully. I need you to come home. Tonight." Silence on the line. Then, distantly, I could hear Lucas's voice in the background. Not the words, just the tone. Sharp, interrogative, wanting to know who she was talking to. "Dad," Lucas says. "I know what Lucas says, Sophia. I know everything he's told you about me. That I'm controlling, that I don't understand your marriage, that I'm keeping secrets. And he's right about one thing. I have been keeping a secret. But it's not the secret he thinks it is, and you need to come home so I can show you." Another pause. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the war happening inside her, the 3 years of Lucas's programming fighting against the lifetime of trust she'd built with me. "Sophia, the police are involved now. There are things happening that I can't explain over the phone, but you need to be safe. Please come home." "The police?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad, what are you talking about? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything except protect you, the way I've been protecting you since the day you were born. Please, sweetheart, come home." The longest silence of my life followed. I could hear Lucas getting closer to her, his voice louder now, demanding to know what was happening. I could hear Sophia's breathing quicken, the sound of a woman caught between two gravitational forces, trying to decide which direction to fall. "Okay," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Okay, Dad, I'll come today. I'll tell Lucas I need to visit you. He won't like it, but I'll come." "I love you, Sophia." "I love you too, Dad." After we hung up, I sat in my study and tried to breathe normally. One piece was in place, Sophia was coming home. But the relief was thin, stretched over a deep and growing dread, because I knew that Lucas would notice her absence. He tracked her movements the way a warden tracks inmates. He'd know she was at my house. He'd know something had changed. And a man who's already escalating, who's already contacted someone like Derek Solis, who's already attempted a break-in at a storage facility, that man doesn't respond to losing control by stepping back and reassessing. He responds by charging forward. I called Jacob. "Sophia's coming home today. I need you here." "Already on my way." Then I called Stephen Garrett. "She's coming. I need everything ready. The trust documents, the prenuptial agreement, everything. When she gets here, I'm showing her all of it." "Vincent, are you sure she's ready?" "She has to be. We're out of time." Sophia arrived at 3 o'clock. She drove herself, which meant Lucas had either been out when she left, or she'd managed to slip away while he wasn't paying attention. When she got out of the car, I watched her from the window for a moment, before going out to meet her. She moved like a woman carrying something heavy and invisible. Her shoulders were curved inward. Her eyes scanned the street before she walked toward the house, the automatic vigilance of someone who'd learned that safety was never guaranteed. When I opened the door, she looked at me, and I looked at her, and the 3 years between us collapsed into nothing. She was my daughter. She was afraid, and she was finally here. Jacob arrived 15 minutes later. Stephen Garrett came shortly after, and in my living room, with the afternoon light coming through the windows and a pot of untouched tea growing cold on the table, I opened the leather journal and began to read. I started from the beginning, not the clinical summary I'd given Detective Lambert, but the real story. The first entry after that Sunday dinner. The observations about Lucas's questions, his appraising eyes, his comment about security. I read the entries about the isolation, about Megan and Rachel and the yoga class and the systematic elimination of every person who might have offered Sophia an alternative perspective. I read about the financial control, the combined bank accounts, the managed paychecks, the allowance system disguised as partnership. I read about the lies, the one about Jacob, about his supposed feelings for her. I watched Sophia look at Jacob when I read that entry, watched something pass between them that was equal parts shame and recognition. Jacob's face was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. 3 years of being pushed away by a woman he cared about. And now she was hearing that the reason had been a deliberate lie engineered to destroy their connection. "I'm sorry," Sophia whispered to Jacob. "I'm so sorry I believed him." "Don't," Jacob said. His voice was rough. "Don't apologize for what he did to you." I kept reading. I read about the bruises, the dates, the locations on her body, the stories she'd told to explain them. I read my own descriptions of watching her flinch, watching her shrink, watching the woman I'd raised become a shadow. With each entry, I watched Sophia's face change. The confusion giving way to recognition, the recognition giving way to horror, the horror giving way to something I'd been waiting 3 years to see, clarity. When I reached the entries about Lucas's phone calls, about the overheard conversation she'd reported to me, about his comment that things would be resolved soon, Sophia stood up. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the glass and made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a scream, and it wasn't a sob. It was something between, the sound of a person finally feeling the full weight of a truth they'd been carrying without knowing it. "He was going to kill you," she said. Not a question, a statement. The conclusion she'd arrived at on her own, reading the pattern I'd laid out, following the escalation to its logical and terrifying endpoint. "He was going to kill you and take the insurance money." "Yes," I said. "I believe so." She turned from the window. Her face was wet, but her eyes were hard. "What else haven't you told me?" I told her about Ray, about the investigation, about Danielle Voss and Karen Lay and the woman in Phoenix, about Lucas Barron, the man her husband had been before he reinvented himself as Lucas Torrance. I told her about the name change, the restraining order, the dropped charges, the pattern of moving from city to city, targeting women, running the same con each time. I wasn't his first, Sophia said. No, but you're going to be his last. Then I showed her what Carol had left. The prenuptial agreement, the trust documents, the insurance policy structured to bypass Lucas entirely, the deed to the house in my name alone, the entire legal architecture that her mother and I had built 12 years ago, long before we knew Lucas existed, designed to protect exactly the kind of future we'd hoped would never come. Sophia held the prenuptial agreement in her hands and stared at it. Mom made me sign this. 3 days before the wedding. She was in the hospital and she made me promise to sign it. I didn't even read it. I just signed it because she asked me to, and she was dying, and I would have signed anything. She knew, I said, not about Lucas specifically, but she knew the world. She knew that love could be weaponized, and she wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, you'd have protection. She saved me, Sophia said. Mom saved me, and she's been dead for 12 years. She saved both of us, I said. There was one more thing. The letter. I'd kept it sealed in the metal cabinet for 12 years, waiting for the moment Carol had described in her instructions. Give this to Sophia when she needs her mother most. Sophia opened the envelope with shaking hands. She read it once in silence, her lips moving slightly. Then she read it again, and a third time. When she finally looked up, she was crying in a way I'd never seen her cry before. Not the tears of pain or fear or confusion that I'd witnessed over the past 3 years. These were the tears of a woman who'd been lost and had suddenly, unexpectedly, been found. She says love doesn't ask you to choose between your safety and someone else's happiness, Sophia said. She says that's control, not love. Your mother was the wisest person I ever knew, I said. Sophia folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. She stood in my living room, surrounded by documents and evidence, and the accumulated weight of 3 years of carefully preserved truth, and something settled in her face. A decision, a line crossed. What do we do now? She asked. And her voice was different, not small, not afraid. Something new was in it, something that had been dormant for 3 years and was now waking up. Now we wait, I said. The police have the evidence. Warrants are being filed. But Lucas doesn't know any of this yet. He doesn't know you're here with the truth. He doesn't know the police are involved. He thinks he still has time. He'll come looking for me, Sophia said. Yes, he will. And when he does. I looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at me. And then I told Sophia the rest of the plan. The part that required Lucas to do exactly what I expected him to do when he realized his wife was gone, his control was broken, and his entire carefully constructed scheme was collapsing around him. When he comes, I said, we'll be ready. I called Detective Lambert and told him Sophia was at my house and that I expected Lucas to make contact within hours. Lambert arranged for officers to be stationed nearby, not at the house, near it, close enough to respond in minutes but far enough away that Lucas wouldn't see them on approach. We spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Jacob and I went through the house, checking the security cameras, testing the motion sensors, making sure every angle was covered. Stephen Garrett prepared emergency documentation. Sophia sat at the kitchen table with her mother's letter in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, reading through the journal entries I'd marked as most critical. At one point, she looked up and said something that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. You know what the worst part is, Dad? It's not that he hurt me. It's that he made me believe I deserved it. He made me believe that being afraid was the same thing as being loved. And I bought it. For 3 years, I bought it completely. That's what they do, I said. That's the playbook. And it works because you're a good person, Sophia. Good people believe in other people. Good people give the benefit of the doubt. That's not a weakness. Lucas exploited it, but it's not a weakness. She nodded slowly. Then she went back to reading, and I watched her turn pages with an expression that was half grief and half something fiercer. She was reading the story of her own captivity, written in her father's handwriting, and she was understanding for the first time that she'd been in a cage so carefully constructed that she'd mistaken the bars for walls and the lock for a door handle. Night came. The house was quiet. Jacob stayed. Stephen went home but remained on call. The unmarked police car sat 3 blocks away, engine off, officers watching. And we waited for Lucas to come. He didn't make us wait long. He came at 9 the next evening, not in the careful, calculated way he'd done everything else for 3 years. He came with the raw, unfiltered fury of a man who'd woken up to find his entire world rearranged without his permission. I heard the car first, tires screeching against the curb outside my house, the engine cutting out with a violent finality, then the door slamming, then footsteps, fast and hard, coming up the walkway. The pounding on the front door was so forceful it rattled the frame. Not a knock. An assault on the wood itself, as if Lucas believed he could punch through it with his bare hands. I looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at me. We'd rehearsed this. We'd planned for exactly this moment. But planning for a thing and living through it are different animals entirely, and as I walked toward the front door with my oldest friend behind me, I felt the full weight of 3 years pressing down on my chest like a hand. I opened the door. Lucas stood on my porch, and the man I saw was not the man Sophia had brought to Sunday dinner 3 years ago. That man had been polished, controlled, wearing his charm like an expensive suit. This man was something else. His hair was wild, his eyes were red-rimmed and darting. His shirt was untucked, and there was sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He looked like a man who'd been running from something and had finally stopped because there was nowhere left to go. "Where is she?" he demanded, pushing past me into the living room before I could respond. "Where's Sophia?" "She's upstairs," I said calmly, "and you need to leave." He spun on me. "She's my wife. You can't keep her from me. You've been filling her head with lies for years, poisoning her against me, and now you think you can just take her? She belongs with me." I noticed his word choice even in that moment. Not, "she wants to be with me," or "she loves me." "She belongs with me." Ownership, possession, the language of a man who'd never once thought of my daughter as a person. "Lucas, I'm asking you to leave. I'm not going anywhere without my wife." His voice was rising, filling the room, bouncing off the walls of a house he'd spent 3 years trying to acquire. "You think you're better than me? You think because you have this house and your money and your secrets that you can just take what's mine?" "Sophia isn't yours," I said. "She never was." Something shifted in his face then. The rage didn't disappear, but it changed texture. It became colder, more focused, more deliberate. He took a step toward me, and I saw his hands ball into fists at his sides. "You have no idea what I'm capable of," he said quietly. "You think your little journal scares me? You think those pathetic notes you've been writing change anything? I know about your documentation, Vincent. Sophia told me about it months ago, back when she still trusted me. She told me everything. That hit me, a cold spike of surprise that I tried not to let show on my face. Sophia had told him about the journal. During one of those periods when she was still deep inside his control, when he was the only person she trusted, she must have mentioned it, which meant Lucas had known for months that I was building a case against him, which meant that everything he'd done since, the storage unit break-in, the calls to Derek Solis, the escalation, all of it had been done with the knowledge that I was watching and documenting. He hadn't been careless at all. He'd been desperate, but he hadn't been careless. He'd simply decided that whatever I had on paper wouldn't matter if I wasn't alive to present it. "You should have minded your own business," Lucas said, taking another step forward. "You should have given us the house when I asked. You should have stayed out of our marriage. But you couldn't do that, could you? You had to be the hero. You had to play protector. And now look where we are." "Yeah," I said. "Look where we are." Jacob moved from behind me then, stepping to my left, positioning himself between Lucas and the hallway that led upstairs. It was subtle, the kind of movement that looked casual, but was entirely deliberate. Jacob was making sure that if Lucas tried to get to Sophia, he'd have to go through both of us. Lucas noticed. His eyes flicked to Jacob and his lip curled. "The loyal friend, the man who's been sniffing around my wife for years. You think I don't know what you want, Jacob? You think I don't see the way you look at her? You don't know anything about me," Jacob said. His voice was level, controlled, but underneath it, I could hear 3 years of suppressed fury running like a current. "I know you're a joke," Lucas said. "I know you've been hanging around this family like a stray dog, waiting for scraps. I know you've been following me around like you're some kind of detective. Yeah, I noticed you at the hardware store. I noticed you at the park. You think you're subtle? You're pathetic." He'd known Jacob was watching him. He'd known, and he'd gone to the hardware store anyway. He'd bought the rope and the plastic sheeting and the chemicals knowing he was being observed. That realization rearranged something in my understanding. Either Lucas had been testing to see if Jacob would react, using the purchase as a provocation to see how much we knew and how far we were willing to go, or he'd been so committed to his plan that even the awareness of surveillance couldn't stop him. Either way, it told me what I already knew. This man was beyond reasoning with, beyond negotiation, beyond any appeal to decency or humanity. He was a machine running a program, and the program's final instruction was to eliminate the obstacle and claim the prize. "Give me my wife," Lucas said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "Give me Sophia, and I walk away. You never hear from me again. You keep your house, your money, your precious storage unit. Just give me Sophia." "No," I said. He lunged. I'd been expecting it. I'd been expecting it for 3 years, really, though I didn't know what form it would take. But when Lucas's hands closed around my throat, when I felt the full, desperate strength of a man who'd run out of options and decided that violence was his last remaining tool, I understood something with perfect clarity. This was the moment Carol had been preparing me for. This was the reason for the prenuptial agreement, the trust, the insurance policy, the storage unit, the letter, every precaution, every document, every hidden protection. It had all been leading to this exact moment where a man tried to kill me in my own living room, and the only thing standing between his success and his failure was the infrastructure of love my wife had built before she died. Jacob moved faster than I would have thought possible. He grabbed Lucas from behind, wrapping his arms around Lucas's chest and hauling him backward with a force that broke Lucas's grip on my throat. They crashed into the bookshelf. Books rained down around them. Lucas twisted free and swung at Jacob, connecting with his jaw. Jacob staggered, but didn't fall. He reset his stance and blocked the next punch with his forearm, redirecting Lucas's momentum and driving him sideways into the wall. I was gasping, my hands on my throat, trying to pull air through a windpipe that felt like it had been compressed to the width of a straw. But even through the pain and the adrenaline, I saw what was happening with a strange detachment. Lucas fighting with the animal desperation of a man who knows he's losing. Jacob fighting with the controlled intensity of a man protecting something he loves. Two forces colliding in my living room while, upstairs, the woman they were both fighting over was listening to every sound. Then the front door burst open. Detective Lambert and 2 uniformed officers came through with weapons drawn, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who do this every day. "Lucas Torrance, you're under arrest." Lucas didn't stop. Even with 3 officers in the room, even with a detective pointing a weapon at his chest, he kept fighting. He threw an elbow at the first officer who reached him. He kicked at the second. He screamed that this was a setup, that I was the criminal, that everyone was conspiring against him, that Sophia belonged to him and no one had the right to take her away. It took all 3 officers to get the handcuffs on him. Even then, he didn't stop shouting. He screamed my name. He screamed Jacob's name. He screamed Sophia's name with a possessive fury that made my skin crawl. He screamed about the house, the money, the insurance, the storage unit. He screamed about everything he'd spent 3 years trying to acquire through manipulation and was now losing in the space of 5 minutes. They searched him. In his jacket pocket, they found a folded printout of my daily schedule. In his car, they found materials consistent with what Jacob had photographed at the hardware store: rope, plastic sheeting, a container of industrial cleaning solution, duct tape, and in the glove compartment, a printed map with my house circled in red ink and a route drawn from his condo to my front door, with timestamps noted along the way. He'd planned it for tonight. If Sophia hadn't left, if Jacob hadn't been here, if the police hadn't been stationed 3 blocks away, Lucas Torrance would have come to my house and used those materials for exactly what they were designed for. And tomorrow morning, my daughter would have woken up to a phone call telling her that her father was dead, and the man beside her in bed would have held her while she cried and whispered, "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." And then he would have started working on the insurance claim. From upstairs, I heard a sound. I looked up and saw Sophia standing at the top of the staircase, her hand on the railing, watching the scene below. Her husband being led away in handcuffs, officers photographing evidence on the living room floor, her father standing with red marks on his throat, her mother's letter still folded in her back pocket. Our eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between us that I don't have words for. It wasn't relief, though relief was part of it. It wasn't vindication, though that was there too. It was something older and simpler and more powerful than either. It was the recognition that we had survived, that the thing we'd both been afraid of, in different ways, and for different reasons, had finally arrived, and we were still standing. Sophia came downstairs slowly. She walked past the officers, past the scattered books, past the dent in the wall where Jacob and Lucas had collided. She walked straight to me and put her arms around my neck, carefully, gently, avoiding the bruises that were already forming on my throat. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over," I said. But it wasn't. Not really. Not in the way that matters. The trial took 3 weeks. The evidence was comprehensive. My journal, Jacob's video footage from the hardware store, Ray Castillo's surveillance reports, the storage unit break-in captured on security cameras, the materials found in Lucas's car, Derek Solis, who turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence and testified that Lucas had offered him $40,000 to make my death look like a home invasion gone wrong, the phone records, the financial trail showing Lucas had systematically drained every account he could access, the court records from Tucson and San Diego and Phoenix showing a decade-long pattern of predatory behavior across 3 states. Sophia testified. She sat in a courtroom 20 feet from the man who'd hurt her for 3 years, and she described, in clear and unflinching detail, what he'd done, the isolation, the lies about Jacob, the financial control, the bruises, and the rehearsed explanations, the overheard phone call about resolving things. She didn't cry on the stand. She'd done her crying. What she did instead was something harder and braver. She told the truth without flinching, without minimizing, without making excuses for the man who'd almost destroyed her. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, domestic violence, financial abuse, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 18 years. The courtroom was quiet after the verdict. Lucas was led away without looking back. Sophia sat between me and Jacob, and for the first time in 3 years, I watched her exhale, really exhale. The kind of breath that comes from the bottom of the lungs, from the place where fear lives, pushing it out like smoke from a room that's finally been opened to fresh air. The months after the trial were not triumphant. They were not cinematic. They were slow and difficult and full of setbacks that don't make for dramatic storytelling but are the real substance of recovery. Sophia moved back into my house. She started seeing a therapist named Dr. Miranda, who specialized in trauma recovery. There were weeks when she was angry, at Lucas, at herself, at me for waiting so long. There were weeks when she couldn't get out of bed. There were weeks when she read through the journal obsessively, as if she were trying to memorize her own captivity, so she'd never mistake a cage for a home again. Jacob was present through all of it, steady, patient, undemanding. He'd come on Sunday afternoons and sit in the living room and talk with Sophia about nothing important. He never pushed. He never asked for anything. He was simply there, the way he'd been there for 33 years, offering the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, or make demands, or keep score. One afternoon, about 4 months after the conviction, I took Sophia back to the storage unit. We stood together in that 10 by 10 room with Carol's belongings around us, and the metal cabinet open, its contents spread on a folding table. The trust documents, the prenuptial agreement, the insurance policy, the deed, the journal, Carol's letter. "This is what he was after," Sophia said quietly, looking at the documents. "This is what he would have gotten if you hadn't stopped him. This is what your mother built," I said. "This is what she spent her last weeks alive putting together, because she understood something about the world that I didn't understand until much later." "What was that?" "That love without protection is just hope. And hope isn't enough. Your mother loved you more than anything, but she also understood that love alone couldn't keep you safe. So she built walls around you, legal walls, financial walls, walls made of documents and signatures and careful planning, not because she didn't trust you, because she didn't trust the world." Sophia picked up her mother's letter and read it one more time. When she finished, she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket, where I suspect it still lives today. "I want the journal," she said. "I want to keep it. It's yours." She held the leather book in both hands, 800 pages of her father's love disguised as documentation, and she looked at me with an expression I'll carry for the rest of my life. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said. I couldn't speak. I just nodded and put my hand on her shoulder and stood with her in that storage unit while the weight of 3 years, slowly, finally, began to lift. The story doesn't end with a dramatic flourish. Real stories don't. It ends with small moments that accumulate like snow, each one insignificant on its own but together forming something substantial enough to reshape a landscape. Sophia continued therapy. She returned to work. She reconnected with Megan and Rachel and the other friends Lucas had driven away. She started doing yoga again, 3 times a week, an hour just for herself. And gradually, so gradually that I couldn't point to the exact day it happened. The light came back into her eyes. Jacob waited. He waited the way only a good man can, without impatience, without agenda, without the need to be rewarded for his patience. And when Sophia was ready, when she'd healed enough to make a choice that came from freedom rather than fear, she chose him. Not because he saved her, not because he was the opposite of Lucas, but because he was kind and steady, and he'd never once in 33 years tried to be anything other than exactly who he was. I watched them drive away together on their first real date, and I stood on my porch in the Los Angeles evening light and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not triumph, peace. The quiet, unremarkable peace of a man who did the only thing he could do and watched it turn out to be enough. People sometimes ask me if I regret the 3 years of silence, if I wish I'd acted sooner, confronted Lucas earlier, shown Sophia the journal before the situation became dangerous. And I tell them the truth, which is that I've made peace with my choices. I was silent because Sophia wasn't ready to hear. I documented because words without evidence can be dismissed. I waited because patience, real patience, the kind that costs you sleep and years and pieces of your heart, is sometimes the only weapon that works against a man who spent his whole life outrunning consequences. Carol knew that. She knew it before I did. She built a fortress out of legal documents and a letter written in a dying woman's handwriting, and she trusted me to stand guard over it until the day it was needed. I'd like to think I didn't let her down. That storage unit is empty now. We cleaned it out on a Saturday morning, Sophia and Jacob and me. We donated Carol's clothes to a shelter. We brought her books and photographs home. We closed the metal cabinet for the last time and turned in the key. The unit that had been my secret, my burden, my insurance policy for 12 years was just a room again. 10 by 10, climate-controlled, smelling faintly of dust and lavender. But what it held, what it really held, wasn't documents or evidence or legal protections. It was proof that love can be patient enough to outlast cruelty. That a father can carry a secret for years, not because he wants to, but because he has to. That a mother's wisdom can reach across 12 years of silence and save the daughter she never stopped protecting. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do for the people you love isn't to fight for them, or speak for them, or rescue them. Sometimes it's to prepare quietly, document carefully, and wait with your heart in your throat for the moment when they're finally ready to save themselves. That's what was really inside that storage unit. Not junk, not secrets, just love, doing the only thing it could do, and hoping it would be enough. It was